And then the other piece of it was just the fear of losing a job increased dramatically. So the top line headline was one of anxiety in the marketplace. Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, welcome to We're Only Human. I'm Ben Eubanks, your host. Goodness, it feels like it's been forever since we've had an episode coming out, and we've been doing a lot of great things though, and I can't wait to share this story today. One of the reports I look forward to, I'm a data nut, you've heard that before. One of the reports I look forward to every year is the annual Job Seeker Nation report, and I see something in there every single year that surprises me, that really resonates, and so I actually asked the team to bring someone, to send someone to chat with us about that. I said, hopefully they're a fellow data nerd. And so we have Jeff Rohrs with us here today to talk about that. Welcome, Jeff.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. Good to have you. Well, tell the audience a little about who you are and what you do, sir.
Sure. I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Jobvite. I am in the midst of month number 3 on the job. So I know names, folks know me, but I've completely onboarded in this virtual work from home environment. So that's been quite interesting. In past lives, I've been Chief Marketing Officer of Yext and the Vice President of Marketing at both Salesforce and ExactTarget. And I call Lakewood, Ohio on the shores of Lake Erie my home.
Awesome. What do you do when you're not at work?
Well, I am a beekeeper in my spare time. It has been quite an interesting thus far. Last year was the first year beekeeping with my daughter, and we managed to get our hive through the winter healthy. In fact, probably too healthy because they have managed to swarm a few times and split once, and we caught one of the swarms. And so now my apiary has gone from 1 hive to 4. So it'll be quite interesting because last year we had 55 pounds of honey, and I'm not quite sure if the harvest will be as robust. If it is, we'll be giving away some honey on this podcast come fall.
I'll have to send you a good granola recipe using honey.
Please do. Please do.
Awesome. Well, that is really neat. That's something that we've never had here before. Someone who's a part-time beekeeper in addition to all the other fun stuff you do. So I mentioned the Job Seeker Nation report. We started out, and I wasn't kidding. That is one of the resources I've always looked forward to. And I don't know how many years it's actually been running, but it seems like forever for me since the earliest days of my career.
11th year. 11th year. Yeah.
Okay. So why don't you give us a couple of the headlines out of that? I'd love to kind of just hear from you. What are some of the big picture ideas coming out of it? And we can kick those around a little bit and discuss why they matter for the HR and TA leaders listening in.
Sure. So, I'm the benefactor of a lot of great work for years and years going back at Jobvite on this report. So it's built up a really nice reputation, taking a look at a snapshot of how job seekers feel about companies, the hiring process, technologies they use, et cetera. This year's wrinkle, however, was right as I was coming on board at the tail end of March, was when obviously COVID-19 really hit and the stay-at-home orders started to affect more and more states. And we saw, massive layoffs and furloughs. So we had done our initial research in February of this year, 2020. And so we went back out and did a smaller set of questions, kind of revisiting them to see what sentiments had changed between February and April of this year. And so, the headlines that you might expect is just in that mere 2 months, the anxiety in the job seeker marketplace had gone up markedly. So, folks felt that in February, about half of them thought it was harder finding a job this year. That went up to about 75%. And the folks who thought it was much harder also doubled from 23 to the mid 40s. And then the other piece of it was just the fear of losing a job increased dramatically from 28% to 47%. So the top line headline was one of anxiety in the marketplace. And that's something that we obviously can all see just from observing the news. As you dig in further, you do get to some further worrisome kind of things that are happening in that job seeker force, but you also begin to see some silver linings and some things that job seekers are adapting. So more of them feel that having a resume is going to be important. more of them are looking towards company reputation and employee culture as things that they are guiding their careers towards companies that they align with there. Now, on the worrisome side, we also saw that 19% of the respondents told us that they or a member of their family had experienced food insecurity and gone without food for 24 hours within that 2-month period before we surveyed in April. And in light of that, one of the things we did right out of the gate when we released the report was to make a donation to feedingamerica.org, and we're encouraging folks who are able at this point in time to make that donation or donate to similar organizations in their community, because that food insecurity obviously is a very, very real need and so fundamental to folks being able to actually go and find that next job. They first need to secure house and home and food.
One of the things that I always think about when I'm thinking about the times that I've been looking for a job is there's already some anxiety there. There's already some measure of fear there when you're putting yourself out there and all the things that go along with that. But this changed it for people. You said, some of those numbers, 50% higher, basically, going to 75% for thinking it was harder to find a job. And I'm curious, what advice, so let's take that and make something actionable out of it or something practical. How can we turn that? So for the TA leaders listening in, like your candidates, obviously we should treat them kindly. We should be considerate of those things. But that seems like it would indicate that the candidate experience would be even more important when people are coming at this, not just from I'm comfortable and I'm just looking, from like I'm biting my nails over here. I'm terrified for my family. I'm trying to find something to do so I can just provide. Any ideas, any insight there, any recommendations?
Sure. I think that the feedback we see in the report is one that, candidates want to have clear communication, and that starts with job descriptions that are sufficiently explanatory so folks can map their skills to job opportunities. And by and large, job seekers felt about, half the time that those descriptions were kind of lacking in detail. And the problem that creates for recruiters is you see a very large group of folks who will actually apply for jobs they don't have the skills for. So if you're not defining the skill set properly, and you're marketing jobs into an environment where there's a surplus of job seekers, you're going to get overwhelmed with both qualified and unqualified candidates. And so I think it's imperative that as you're posting things, as you're thinking about how to craft descriptions, that they're sufficiently specific. But also now's the time for you to be thinking about, how do I automate this, right? How do I automate candidate screening? How do I, use text or chatbots to, filter folks in a way that is quick, respectful, and even-handed in how you approach it. So some of those front-end things I think are pretty critical. And then what's interesting is if you look into kind of the communication piece of what's going on, there's a real opportunity to, use the channels of email and phone to move folks into perhaps channels that are going to be more efficient for you, like text. So we saw that about 80% of folks initially prefer email as kind of a principal channel of communication. But once you've communicated with them via text, 60% of them would then say they actually prefer that. So there's this interesting opportunity to move people into channels where you might be able to have greater efficiency and they actually respond better, because 98% of texts are actually responded to, as opposed to 20% of emails having a successful open rate. So there's a communication piece here that's going to be important, because a high volume of candidates are going to, really want to see responsive communication. You don't want it to fall into a black hole, because that can negatively impact your employer brand and the experience they have if they don't get that first job, and you might want to talk to them later on down the line as a candidate for something else.
Well, speaking of the brand, one of the things you mentioned earlier was that more of these candidates are looking at reputation, they're looking at culture, they're looking at those things. The job description, the job ad, like that's, yes, let's check that box, but then they want to go deeper and really understand who they're about to marry themselves up to potentially, and what they can find out about those employers. Any further insights there, or any, if not, any advice for employers on how to make sure they're showing their culture through how they're doing these things?
Well, as a testament to 2020 and how fast it moves, when we first came out with this report towards the beginning of May, we were talking about it in the context of, perhaps, this part of what's happening in the market due to the pandemic hasn't caught up to job seekers. And maybe they're being, too picky in instances. And if they truly are in a situation of financial straits, perhaps their standards will, perhaps be lessened, and they'll be willing to take roles that perhaps they wouldn't have, or with companies they wouldn't have. Well, now fast forward as we record this, towards the beginning, middle of June, we now obviously have the Black Lives Matter protests in relation to the killing of George Floyd and how that has really spread around the globe. And you see companies handling that in public fashion in varying degrees of success. Some have been, very successful because they have a track record of being respectful for the needs of African Americans, the Black community. You have others who are being called to the mat because of perceived or real hypocrisy. And so it's interesting that we have these two huge societal forces at play. The pandemic, which has created a great deal of stress, a great deal of uncertainty. And by the way, in that last month, from May to June, we've also had the biggest stock market rally. And we're now beginning to see unemployment tick down, although it's still very much in the double digits. So these things create a real cacophony of challenge, I think, for the recruiter to kind of work through. But what they point to is your employee brand and how you represent yourself to your current employees and the outside world, your customers, is going to be critically important in terms of making sure that you are projecting the type of employer you want to be, the kind of world you want to work in, and the kind of policies that are beneficial to not just perhaps shareholders, but to the real human beings who work for your company, who have a variety of anxieties and concerns and things that are very real right now, and we as a society are dealing with at a global level. So it's an intriguing snapshot we took, but it was just a snapshot. And now you fast forward a month and there's so many more things we can be discussing and picking apart. But I firmly believe that voice of the company, comes from the culture of how you act, not just what you say. It's not just about putting up a black box on a social media profile. It's about what are the benefits that you're providing? How do you treat your employees? How does your CEO deal with things in a public fashion? And how do they communicate with employees and outside the organization? So really challenging time for everyone involved, but ultimately I'm a believer that action has to be a firm foundation of it.
Yes, absolutely. For a lot of recruiters, they, like it or not, are the public face of their companies in some ways, and they've got to make sure they're putting the best foot forward. They're working with their marketing team to make sure they're putting the right front out there, the way they're sharing their brand, the way they're talking about things. Again, in the midst of this, saying something or not saying something is telling, and you got to be really careful about the kind of message you're putting out there. One thing that I recall, I remember taking a look at the survey before we jumped on this conversation, and one of the things that stuck out to me was this focus on career growth. When I looked at the things that candidates were looking for, it was higher than anything else in terms of a priority for them. And the talent ability conversation, I know, is one that you and the team have focused on a lot in the last year, and will continue to. But I'm curious, any insight there around what just, any further conversation around the career mobility piece, the focus on that candidates are not just looking for, I want a job for today, and I'm going to stay in this job for the next 10 years, because we know that doesn't happen usually. They're looking for a stepping stone, and if companies and recruiters and TA leaders can help those people see what that career path looks like inside the business, it seems like that would be a critical way to really attract them and appeal to them in the hiring process. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. 56% of folks said it was the most important factor when they're looking for a new job opportunity is career growth. And so if you flip that around, it means that a lack of perceived job growth or internal mobility is what's driving folks away. And, we discovered that, a very large percentage of those surveyed did not know if their employees or their employers even had a internal mobility program, or they weren't well versed on it. So the first step is, if you have a program, make sure you're educating your employees about it. If you do any tiered rankings or assessments or things, you want to make sure that your top players are aware of the opportunities for growth, no matter what their level of experience, so that they can see a future and a path within the organization. They don't have to look outside. The other thing that was interesting about the survey results is that, we saw a trend towards stability, and this has been, I think, amplified by what has happened in the pandemic responses. Companies contracted as they furloughed workers. Folks, naturally kind of gravitates toward, stability. And certainly as you get older, we found in the survey that's one of the driving factors, and people are staying at jobs longer once they, crest 40, 50 years old, which stands to reason. It'll be really intriguing to see what happens with millennials and the next generation of workers that are entering into the workforce with regard to this experience. This is such a seismic shift. I mean, just an absolute earthquake of huge proportion that has happened in so many different careers. Will it change their mindset? But I truly believe that as you look at companies, they think about what's happened to them, how they're going to be adjusting, whether it's supporting more work from home, et cetera. The ability to have trusted employees grow within the company who've been there a long time, that's going to be a huge asset, as opposed to folks who've got far more transient workforces. So I think it is something to watch, and the place it has to start is with educating folks as to the programs you have to facilitate that career growth within.
Yes, absolutely. And there's usually when I talk to HR and to talent leaders about this idea, they're like, yeah, we agree, we know it's important, but we're not sure how to start. And one of the things, just as a not necessarily a sidebar, this is a corollary, I guess, to the things that Jeff was just saying. For those of you listening, one of the things in the survey they found was that people, 2/3 of workers never or rarely check the internal job postings. So you're like, well, we got a job board. They don't always check that. They need to hear that. Let give the manager some permission, some encouragement to share that. I know that's in some companies, that culture is that would be a little bit challenging. That would require someone to do something they might not want to do. Managers don't want to lose their great people. But at the same time, if they keep treating that person like their very own private resource, eventually that person's going to chafe and they'll leave. They'll be upset because they don't have that ownership of their career. They don't have that opportunity to look at other roles. And so helping to bring managers in and to really partner on this, there's a lot of research beyond just this study that says that's a really critical way to make that work. So just a quick snippet there to add in what you were saying. Like there are ways to make that practical and to make that work without just saying, okay, that's a big deal. Hopefully we can get to that one day and moving on like it's not going to happen.
Well, and the great thing is whereas in the past that might have been a battle to fight, you now actually have kind of this analogy. So many managers were against the idea of working from home. And now due to the pandemic response, so many managers now understand, oh my gosh, I actually get more productivity and a happier employee in a work from home environment. That's not 100%, obviously. There's varying experiences, and it really depends on kind of your work from home situation. But so many companies have had their eyes open to an assumption they made about that. Well, so too with the idea of internal mobility, and boy, I don't want to lose this person to something in the organization. They're so valuable to me. It will open eyes, hopefully, that you can say, hey, just like we learned that, we need to learn that if we don't give this person room to grow, it's not a question of will you lose them? You will. It's just a question of whether we retain them as an organization and remain strong and retain all of that institutional knowledge, or they go elsewhere.
I really like that tie-in there. We've already broken down some of this inertia that they felt like we've done it this way. Well, suddenly that's up in smoke. Let's now use this as a positive force for these other changes that need to happen. I like that. One of the things that I enjoy, I love doing survey work. I love doing research because almost always something is in there that surprises me. I don't know if there's anything in there necessarily for you that you're like, oh, I didn't expect that, or I didn't know that number was going to be that big or anything like that. But anything that you saw in the data that just kind of jumped out at you that surprised you?
36% of the respondents in February said they have a plan to have a second source of income. that jumped up to 46%, so a 10% increase in April. So you'd have nearly half of the respondents say, we're going to be looking for a second source of income. I found that to be very intriguing, especially since, again, we're recording this in June. The stats just came out that the technical recession began in February. So I halfway wonder if that was almost like a canary in the coal mine before we even went back out with the April research, that something's happening in the marketplace, and there is a financial push and pull going on here for job seekers to make ends meet. And this ties into so many of the societal strains that we're experiencing. One can only hope that at a policy level, both at the state and federal level, we begin to look at that. But it is something for, I think, recruiters to be mindful of. You're going to have policies and, clarity and transparency around, the ability to hold a second job and what that means, or to have secondary sources of income, gig economy types of things on the side.
I don't know how old you are, Jeff, and I'm not going to ask you to tell us, but do you remember moonlighting policies? I used to work for companies that had those, and it was very specific and very strict. Basically, we own you, and as long as we pay you, you can't do anything else. And
yep.
At some point, those went away for the most part, I guess. But that's the thing I thought of when you were saying that. Is, that used to be the norm. Like we didn't let you do anything else, and now it's almost like, hey, cool. Everybody's got a side hustle going. Everybody's got something that they're doing, because not just because the income part of it, which right now, again, that I'd expect that's part of the reason that number jumped, the security and the income piece. But even back in February, before all this started, people were looking for an outlet for creativity. First, I just want to do something fun. I just want to meet new people, whatever might be encouraging them to do that. So being open to that, being more flexible. And again, going back to the point you made a few minutes ago, if this whole change that the world has seen in the last few months encourages companies to be more flexible overall and to be more human centric, there are a lot of these things like that that will help to be solved. That will be helped by that sort of bigger change, which is interesting.
Well, and if you dig underneath that, we moved lightning fast from an era of, job seeker scarcity, right? With, record low unemployment, to one of record high unemployment. And at a time of record low unemployment, employers don't have the power. The power, really rests with the job seeker. And so policies like moonlighting, slowly went away, especially in areas where the talent is in extraordinarily high demand and the talent holds the power. And so if you follow a traditional logic pattern, one would think that as you moved into an era where the power now is shifted back to employers because there's high unemployment, that employers might be able to demand more. However, I think, maybe that horse has left the barn a little bit, but what it points to is, if your policy is to be accommodating, you still need a policy, and it still needs to be clearly communicated, or else, it is subject to potential abuse. And not everybody has the same kind of acumen and experience and skill set to understand, hey, if this is the primary job, right, you're going to, put the majority of your time here, we're getting that first energy type of effort. And so those communications have to be upfront. They're very difficult to have, once you're in that circumstance and you haven't made it clear to the employee set what the rules are. So I'm a fan of having clarity around those kind of rules, because I think it lessens your problems downstream.
So you and I have talked through some of the highlights, certainly not all of them from the report. If someone wants to get their hands on it, wants to dig into it, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Just go to jobvite.com. You can check out our resources section. We've got not only the 2020 Job Seeker Nation report, but a number of infographics and blog posts dissecting different parts of it. And if you can't find it in that fashion and you prefer a different way, just drop 2020 Job Seeker Nation into your local Google and it will find it for you.
Thank you, Google, for that help. You also told me you guys are about to start doing some other fun stuff coming up this summer. Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, and so is our team. So, in thinking about an environment in which, a number of recruiters and talent acquisition professionals are seeking their next role because of the upheaval that's happened the last couple months, in thinking about those recruiters who are in-house and perhaps idled because they're not hiring as they once did, or thinking about those folks who are working harder than ever because they're having to ramp up either as an essential business or one that has growth opportunities. We thought about, what kind of educational programming, what kind of things that help skills, and just provides a little bit of a different approach to things could we put together. So we have launched, by the time this comes out, what we call the Summer to Evolve. And you can see the whole lineup at the summertoevolve.com. It's going to consist of on-demand videos that we post to YouTube called Recruiter Skills Sessions. We've got these sessions called Too Talented, which I'm really excited about. And Ben, you're participating in one of them where we're putting somebody from inside the talent acquisition industry opposite somebody from outside. And so in your case, I'm so excited about this one because I think it's on, let me double check my date here, but I think we've got you slated for August 26th, which is a Wednesday, sitting opposite Paul Raitzer. And Paul Raitzer is the founder of the Marketing AI Institute. So I know HRAI is near and dear to your heart. Mm-hmm. Paul has built the Marketing AI Institute, and I can't wait to just get you guys together to talk about the implications, the applications of AI and automation in your respective fields. So those Two Talenteds are going to be really a lot of fun. We've got Joe Polizzi, who's the godfather of content marketing, talking with Joel Cheeseman. We've got, actually, the first one we're doing is Lori Sylvia with Jade Burrell, who is the founder of Telemetry, which is now a part of Jobvite. So some really interesting, unique kind of mixes on that. And then the other programming, we're doing some demo days around our product just so that people can get to know the Jobvite Talent Acquisition Suite, and Recruiter Real Talk roundtables, peer-to-peer conversations. And then the fun one that's a little bit different is called the Break Room. And for the first session, we've got IndyCar driver James Henchcliffe, who really had an extraordinary accident on the racetrack, almost killed him. Came back a year later to place on the pole of the IndyCar race at Indianapolis, so the Indianapolis 500. And in that same year was the runner-up on Dancing with the Stars. And we've also got Damon Wayans Jr. and Chris Jones. Damon Wayans Jr. being the actor. And we've got Chris, who's his co-founder of this app called Special Guest App. And we're going to talk about how they evolved that app. So just a lot of really fun free content. So it's running 12 weeks, individual sessions you can register for free, and looking to hopefully help people upgrade their skills and, just have some really enjoyable content to pepper in throughout their summer.
That is tremendous. Well, I really appreciate you joining me for the conversation today, Jeff. Again, as a fellow data nerd, and I can tell, right, you're throwing the numbers around, you know the stuff back and forth. I really appreciate you helping me to share some of those stories, some of the encouragement with the HR, the talent leaders out there about what's happening in the marketplace, the most up-to-date kind of view of the world we have. I appreciate it.
No problem, anytime. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Awesome. To everybody else, hope you enjoyed our conversation today on We're Only Human. We'll catch you next time. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.